think speaking to people that have gone through that journey, and they can offer you advice as well. I'm always willing to give up my time. I think most people I've met through my journey also would be exactly the same. So I think, yeah, reaching out to people is probably key.
Hello and welcome to PhD Talk Show. Today we have with us Dr. Kirsty Smitten, who is founder and CEO of Metallobio. Welcome, Kirsty, to the show.
Hiya, I'm Kirsty, CEO and co-founder of Metallobio, and we're making a new antimicrobial class to target gram-negative bacteria, and then also coatings for medical devices to prevent biofilm formation on the medical device surface.
So that's interesting. So you started your company immediately after your PhD. So what was your motivation and from where you got this idea to start your own company?
Yeah, so originally a bit of background. So originally my research group work on ruthenium compounds for oncology. And what we did was adapted the compounds around the outer of the compound to make them more readily taken up by bacteria rather than eukaryotic cells. And then that led us to make a new class of antimicrobials. They showed very, very promising activity. So we filed a patent with the university. And then I did the Lean Launch Programme and Innovate UK's iKill programme, which are commercial programmes, pre-accelerators to discover whether you have a commercially viable product, whether there's a market need, whether customers will buy it, and then also how you should move it forward. So should you license it out, or should you develop it within a startup and then develop it commercially that way? So we were recommended to spin out by a expert panel, and from then, whilst writing my PhD thesis, we spun Metallobio out in March of 2021.
Oh, that's great. So going from PhD to company or a startup, so you must have struggled to file patents instead of publications. So how you make up your mind and now moved to the company setup?
Yeah, so I think it's difficult. As an academic, you want to publish, and obviously as a PhD student, I always in my head had this plan, even from when I started my degree, that I was going to do a PhD, do a postdoc, get a lecturing position, and then hopefully go on to professor track. And that was what I wanted to do, whether it be here or in the US. But then when we came to the point of realizing that we did have something that needed to be protected by a patent, we spoke to the university, and the general consensus was we do need to patent this. When obviously it's better to patent later in some cases because you get more time. Our development is going to eat up some of our patent time. But it is also, in a way, if you know there's other groups working on things similar, it's also in a way better to patent to cover yourself from, because if there's any prior art at all out in the public domain, even if it be someone doing a presentation, that means you can't cover this, and that's where that balance needs to be. So basically we came to the consensus with the university that we would file for a patent quickly because I needed to publish just for my career. I wanted at that point to go into academia, and I had a lot of research, and I needed that publication. And so we quickly patented, and then we published our first paper following that patent. So we filed the patent in April 2019, which now is in regional national phase, and we're, fingers crossed, about to get an exception for one of our areas. So we should soon have a completely published patent. So I think now it's changed a lot. So we patented so that we could publish before, just so that we had the coverage, but now we keep everything as know-how within the company. If any of it is new IP, we'll look at when best to patent it again. Publication wise, things will only come out if they're covered under our original patent or if a new patent has been filed. So we do still or intend to publish within the company, but it is all dictated on the IP. So you go from thinking yeah, this is really good for publication. And then that's where something else comes in as well. When you have a company, and it's really hard as an academic, and I know my supervisor is getting better with it, but sometimes struggles with it as well, is as an academic, you want to research everything. So we've done an RNA sequence of E. coli at once it's exposed to our compound, so we can see exactly what what genes are up and down regulated. And this opens up a wide range of studies that we could do. And as an academic, you want to look into them all. But as a company, you need to think what's viable, what the cost benefit is to doing everything, and your mindset kind of has to change. And it's the same here. Like everything that we do now, we do around IP. So it's like, will this experiment generate new IP? Will this experiment develop our tech further? Whereas before it was, will this experiment get us a high impact publication? And you kind of have to change your thinking, because we have a lot of data that could get us a high impact publication, but it needs to be kept as know-how so that we don't lose the ability to patent it at a later stage.
Yeah, interesting. I think you adapted well to industry or startup environment in short duration. So well done. As you mentioned that there was a lot going on when you moved from PhD to your own startup. So was your journey smooth, or were there obstacles which you have to take care?
Yeah, I think I've I've molded quite well into being a CEO. I think the the general pathway, if you come from academia into a startup as a early career researcher, is you might be CEO for the first couple of months, but then you typically bring in a more experienced CEO and you'd move to like a CSO or a CTO role, which originally is what we'd considered that would happen with us. But I think I've gone so well into the role, are doing quite well, that's not been the case. So I think in terms of my personal transition into the company, I think that has been quite smooth. I could pick things up quite quickly. But at the actual hurdles, I think being an early stage company, everyone will say funding, and that's the main one. Funding in AMR is incredibly hard. So basically the antibiotics model is incredibly flawed, and it's flawed at the commercial end. So what happens is a new antibiotic is developed, and then when it reaches the clinic, it's not used by clinicians because they want to save it to prevent resistance emerging. So it becomes the very last line drug, which means that it is typically rarely used, which, as you can imagine, then impacts how much is bought and the return for the company, which means that of the last two SMEs that have bought out a new drug onto the clinic, they have actually folded. They became bankrupt even after the drug was approved. So that end point is really bad, and investors know that. So investors know that there's no market returns there in AMR now, because it's not the problem right now. But in a couple of years, it's going to get worse. So there are some investors that are looking into that future, and one of them, well, two of them are Novo Nordisk and Boehringer Ingelheim Venture Fund. They have a fund dedicated to antibiotics now, and that's because they know that there's the problem there, and in the future the market will be there. New things are changing that market. So the UK are actually pioneering in this area. So we have introduced the NHS subscription model, and what that basically does is offer market returns to companies based on the value of the drug, in terms of, rather than how much it's used. So basically, if you bring a new class to the market that is going to be very valuable in terms of like saving lives, in terms of reducing mortality rates, in terms of being better than everything else that's not currently there, instead of how much it's used being the return, it's deemed on that value. So you're improving that business model. So funding will get better, but right now for someone working in anti-infectives, the hurdle is the funding. And then for me, the hurdle is explaining to investors that business model. So basically explaining why it's flawed and how it's going to change. And I've had to very quickly learn that. And I think that's where my difficulty, I think, has been, is figuring out the way to translate that easily to an investor. So I've had to overnight become an expert in science policy, in basically business models and new models that were coming in, push and pull incentives, like everything I'd never even heard of before. I had to become an expert in, because that was the only way that I'd be able to explain to people that didn't understand why they should invest in an antibiotic, because otherwise they wouldn't. And I think that investment has been the biggest hurdle for us. And I think there's many things that come into play with that. So there's that business model for antibiotics. I also think on another front is being a woman. And it sucks, and I hate to play on it, but sometimes it is unfortunately the truth that a Harvard report found that only 2.3% of investment funding goes into female-led startups. So you're fighting like a negative percent from the off, and then being in Sheffield makes it even worse. So most investment in the UK goes into the south, so it goes into the Oxford, Cambridge triangle, London triangle. So not only am I fighting a battle there, I'm also fighting a battle with my location, and that's hard. So like I think in terms of investment, that is hard, and I think I'm doing well, and that's good. I think in terms of like a role model. So I'm currently on Women Innovators Award, so Women in Innovation with Innovate UK, and that's basically, that award was made to try and help that problem. So it gives 50 women founders a year £50,000 towards their company of non-dilutive funding. But part of that, we have to do like a lot of role model stuff, and I think that's where that comes into play. So like explaining how we even got investment in the first place to try and help other people, because that is the major hurdle. And understanding the market, I think the earlier on you can clue yourself up about the market problems, the better, if you're coming straight from PhD and into this kind of role.
Yeah, I think looks like you are into very risky business, and but you adapted well, and I think you are learning a lot of things and modifying how you could like help investors understand the need. Could you tell more about molecules which are under investigation or which are in your pipeline, and how novel they are?
Yeah, so currently every antibiotic on the clinic is an organic compound. They're based on naturally derived products. Our compounds are inorganic, so we've explored a completely new chemical space. So the compounds themselves are really novel. Their synthesis is modular, so I usually describe it like Lego. We have a central scaffold and then building blocks that we can add around the outside. We can change these building blocks, so that gives us the capability to make a whole library of these compounds, which is really good because the compounds themselves are a new class. So not only could we bring a new drug to the market, but we could also bring a whole entire library of a new class to the market. So that's really beneficial, especially when you're trying to combat resistance. The drugs themselves target gram-negative bacteria. So what we're looking at the moment is Acinetobacter baumannii and Pseudomonas for hospital-acquired and ventilator-acquired pneumonia. And basically every drug, again, in the clinic, and every ruthenium-based compound that's ever been studied prior to our research has always been gram-positive targeting. So there's a really high unmet need for gram-negative targeting antimicrobial agents. So that, again, is an innovative part of the technology. Also, they have a novel mechanism of action that we're currently determining. Unfortunately, due to IP, I can't explain what that is. But yeah, so they have a novel mechanism of action. So they are highly novel. That is our unique selling point, is mostly around the science. And what I said in terms of impact as well is, if we can bring an inorganic drug to the market, it opens up a whole new chemistry. So at the moment, if you look in the pipeline, there's 112, when I last looked, antibacterial agents in the pipeline. 75% of them are based on pre-existing classes. If you think about the resistance to those classes already exists. So yeah, you've made a new drug and you've adapted it, but the resistance mechanisms are still there, and eventually they are going to come into play, and it will be a lot quicker than if you have a new class. So you need that new class. And then again, when you start looking into it, not only 2 of that 115 are a new class, have a novel target, and can target all World Health Organization priority pathogens. So that really limits what's coming up, basically what we have. And our new class and the compounds within that class can do all those things. Actually, our highest activity resides within Acinetobacter, which is one of the priority pathogens. So that, in terms of novelty, that really is there. With the technology, they're very different to what's on the market. But in terms of impact, what I like about them is that we are hopefully bringing a new science, basically a new field of chemistry into an area that is unfulfilled. So like there hasn't been a new class of antibiotics enter the clinic in over 35 years. And I think we need to look elsewhere. We need to stop focusing on organic compounds. And it's, yeah, I think that will be key. Like if we could get them passed and we can get them there, I think it will be key to improving the antibiotic field massively.
Interesting. I think you have used your education well, and now you are building a new business with your educations and skills you learned during your master's and PhD. I'd like to know, when it comes to running a company, what was the role of networking you realized and how it helped you in like growing your business?
Yeah, networking is massive. So I think networking comes to play in like every aspect of the business. So currently we're looking for a CSO, and like networking really helps with that. The thing like I said previously was warm introductions. So trying to get a conversation with an investment firm, if you haven't pitched in front of them already at an event, is very difficult. They get thousands of decks come through to them like every month. So they can't read them all. Like it's just physically impossible. So if you have a warm introduction from someone in your network, then that's key. And I think on every single front, in whether it's recruitment, whether it's raising funding, even whether it's my personal development. So I have a mentor to me as the CEO, and he's been really good for me. So he is a very very highly accoladed person. He's sold 2 companies on IPO and they went for a lot of money. So he's got a lot of experience in this area. And I think he opens up a lot of doors to his connections, and so does our executive chairman, whose background is in business development and licensing. He has connections everywhere and anywhere. And so like if we want to talk to a large pharma company, he has a network, and like if he doesn't know someone within that company, we'll definitely be able to find them. So I think that's been really helpful in every aspect of the business. And I always say to my research associates, I'm quite big on developing them, like their personal development and their career development. So I think they're working in a startup and they're just in the lab every day, then they're only doing something that a research associate would do. So we try and get them involved in like commercial activities as well. So we bring them on work calls and we could take them to events. And I always say at the events, like network. Like just talk to as many people as you can, and that's the best thing to do. So I think we've been at a lot of trade shows where I haven't had a meeting with someone booked in, and I've managed to speak to someone and they're like, oh well, I know that person, and then you end up getting that connection built in. So I think it's fundamental to network.
Thanks a lot for sharing the tips for networking, and you are doing great, and your startup is exploring new avenues, and we are hopeful that we'll have some molecule in the market which could target gram-negative infections. Before we wrap up, one message for PhD students who might be thinking of starting their own startup, how they can learn skills which are essential, and how they can get courage to have something of their own.
Yeah, so I think courses like they've been fundamental to me. So the lean launch and the ICIL that I talked about, also which I didn't talk about previously, is the Royal Academy of Engineering and the Royal Society of Chemistry. Both offer a entrepreneurial. It's effectively like a year postdoc kind of position, and you're called. God, I forgot what it is, but it's an entrepreneurial position. Entrepreneur fellowship, I think it is, and you basically develop your tech during that time. So you take it from how you've had it in your PhD, you get it to more of a commercially ready technology, and you get a lot of business mentoring, you get coaching, peer-to-peer support. So there's a lot of stuff involved in those programs that are really, really good prior to spinning out. You can also do them if you've already spun out. So I did mine in my first year of my spin out, but you can do them prior to spinning out as well. I think also watching webinars. So there's a lot of free webinars out there. I know that my executive chairman does a lot of webinars on commercialization, and it's more in medtech, but I think that's key as well. So even if you just Google webinar, like startup webinar, and then I know Google offer quite a lot as well that are free and to do with startups. So I think it's just making use of your whole network, and also within your university they will have a commercial team, or they should have a commercialization team. So if you speak to one of them, so my technology transfer officer has been so vital in my journey that he's now my COO, and soon to be full-time COO as well. So he's trusts me that much that he's usually leaving a very secure university job to come on to us full time. And I think they'll be open to having a conversation, and whether it be that you've got something now that you could commercialize from your PhD, or you've got an idea. So they also support ideas that are nothing to do with your PhD. So you can go to your commercial team at university and say, if you're doing a PhD in chemistry, but you've made an app for clothes, like you could go to your commercial team and they will help support that, and they could put you through Lean Launch or iCure with that. So it doesn't have to even be related to what you're doing. So I think it's just making use of like facilities around you, speaking to people like me. Like if anyone wants to approach me through LinkedIn, I'm happy to have a conversation. So I think speaking to people that have gone through that journey, and they can offer you advice as well. I'm always willing to give up my time. I think most people I've met through my journey also would be exactly the same. So I think, reaching out to people is probably key.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for offering your time, and thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you.